introduce William a bit. He's a computer science PhD student at Glasgow, and he's wrote his thesis on game balancing, and he's been at the department since the undergraduate degree in 2013. So he's soon to be looking to start a career in development or research. And so I'm going to pass it over to you, William, and I'll leave you to take it on from here.
Thank you very much. Cheers. The last conference or work thing I went to was quantitative evaluation of systems. And it was 4 days long, and it was a slightly different vibe to this. But this is fun. I'm liking this. This is fun. Different, but fun. So this panel is about pathways into research. So we've had today a showcase of research. We've had discussions about research sort of in the wild, as it were. And now we're going to talk about, is it good? Is it fun to be a games researcher? Is it easy to do? Is it rewarding? How do you get there? These kind of questions. And for that, we have 3 people who between them have, I haven't crunched the numbers, but decades of research experience or time in games research, as well as in other areas around games research, forgive me, which might offer an alternative should people decide it's not for them. So starting then, Dave of Cat fame, do you want to introduce yourself and talk to people about why it is we're so excited to have you?
All right. Well, I'm David Farrell. I'm a lecturer for, let me just check the clock, 1.5 more days at Glasgow Caledonian because I'm leaving actually next week. But I've been a lecturer for about 8 years there. I teach game design. I do research in game design, and I've made a bunch of games in that context. And I've been involved in games since about 2003, 4, 5, around about then when I started to move in that space.
Cool. So we're just going to do brief introductions, then we'll move on to pathways into research, given that's the sort of key theme next. So Romana.
Hello, I'm Romana Ramzan. I am a producer at No Code here in Glasgow. I was colleagues with David for quite a long time, so it's nice to see a familiar face again. Yes, I was at Glasgow Caledonian University. I was a lecturer in game design as well. And yeah, back in industry again and enjoying it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And Robin, finally. If you,
yeah, I can unmute. I can definitely unmute. There we go. So, hi, I'm Robin. I'm a lecturer at Abertay University, where I've been lecturing sort of since 2007, full time since 2011. Prior to that, I was worked in games in various roles in art and various sort of post-production roles, everything from marketing to technical QA, before going on to do a PhD in games.
Cool. So sticking with you, Robin, then, how did you find yourself in games? Were you always going to be a games researcher as a kid? Were you dreaming of thinking about games day in, day out?
A games researcher, yeah. Well, I think growing up in the 1980s, I think pretty much my dad, he owned an electronics store. It was the 80s. Everyone was self-employed, running their own business. That's what you had to do. And that was the thing. So he opened a video store, then an electronics store. So we had access to loads of kit. He's also a musician, so he had Cubase and lots of setup for recording music. So I kind of got into it that way, designing games as a kid. And then I went to high school, and then they of course they tell you that's not a thing. You don't do that. you do these other things, and come very close to becoming a mechanic, which is a bit of a divergence. But then ended up kind of studying art. My first degree was art. I kind of wanted to be a graphic designer because it was a career. It was a clear career route at the time. And then kind of in the last year of my study, kind of figured out that actually, no, you can. you can work in games. You could even do a degree in games. It was weird because I was studying at Abertay, because obviously they had games degrees, but I hadn't gone there for games at all. I'd gone there because I did motion graphics, photography, digital art, that kind of thing. And then, lo and behold, my last year of study kind of focused on games, and then kind of came into it that way into the games industry.
I should say as well, if anyone has any questions for any of the panelists, put them in the chat. I'll try and keep them and ask them at the end. So David, then, why games?
Why games?
Why games? How games? How games? We'll do why games later. Sorry.
Why games? Because games is cool. Is a short version.
Sure.
How games? Games research in particular was kind of a bit of a weird backwards accident for me. I did computer science. I was doing web tech. I thought games were cool on the web, so I went back to uni to become a game programmer. There was a lecturer there that blew my socks off called John Sykes. He got me excited about design. I thought, my goodness, design is so cool. And then I did that digital competition. That's a mention from Matt. Abertay, and then on the back of that, got a job in London at a university making games. So this was the way I got into accident, because this university had a big European project. They wanted a game made, and they wanted one person to do it, which is wild. So, they hired me to do games, programming, art, and to design, and all the research. And of course, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do the art, but I did the other things, and that was a really good calling card. If you do design, programming, and all the research and all that kind of nonsense, it makes you kind of useful for certain kinds of people. And on the back of that, I came to GCU, where I took literally 10 years to do a PhD, and I hated every minute of it. But I love doing research, right? So the two are not the same. And I've done loads and loads of research, made a bunch of games along the way. I've got a little team at GCU making games, like a little in-house dev team. And right after I get my PhD, now I'm leaving the uni. So it's totally obviously an accident, but we can talk about why it's still cool. I love it. I'm not leaving because I hate it.
Well, you say they're different. In what way are they different, doing a PhD in games and research in games?
Well, the freedom you have as an academic is a freedom to pursue whatever speaks to your heart, to some extent. 50% of the job is just slamming on those hours teaching, right? I also love those hours teaching, but that is just not changing every year. It's changing a little bit, but it's basically you turn up, you do your thing. The other 50%, some of my colleagues have decided at a very young age they want to count down their days to retirement, but other people decide they want to take over the world, or they want to investigate and study their own little weird proclivity and enthusiastic little notion, and that's me, right? So the freedom you get to say, I think this is cool, and then make that your job, that's amazing. And that's what research is. PhD is this guilty feeling of not having done your homework for 10 years. And that's basically, I've done about 4 failed PhDs and then just banged one out in a couple of years with the help of one guy at uni. So yeah, that's the difference. One is like homework, obligation. I am beholden to somebody else. My agency is given over to the system and they're forcing me to do this ridiculous thing that I hate. And the other one is research, which is, I get to do all this cool stuff and investigate ideas and become some kind of wild, weird Venn diagram expert on some stuff.
So Romana, then, what was your way into games?
So games, I've always been into playing games from like a young age, and for me they were like a way to sort of communicate with people. So I've moved around a lot when I was growing up, and different countries and so on, and not all of them were English speaking countries, so games were like a way to kind of bond and form connections and friendships with people. So I've always been kind of interested in that domain, and then when I came to GCU for my undergraduate, like I decided to pursue IT because I've always been interested in tech, and at that time they didn't have like games courses. And it was in my undergrad year that I decided that I think that's when I found that there was a topic on games and you could pick it as your honours project, which was really exciting. And of course I had to hear from my parents, like, is this like a viable option and will you get a job at the end of it? Thankfully they didn't turn around and say, I told you so. So yes, I've always been interested in it, and I think what David said, he actually kind of hit the nail on the head. At that point, when I did my honours project, I really liked research, and that's what sort of catapulted me to go down the whole academic route. But research and PhD are 2 different things, so I completely agree with that. And so as much as I loved like the research part, the PhD part was very much that kind of guilty thing that kind of hangs over your head, and it was very different to what the aspects of research that I did enjoy when I was stuck in that emotion lab for God knows how many years.
All right, so if let's say hypothetically, let's have some 17, 18-year-old who's trying to choose what future career they want to do, and they think, oh, games research sounds fun. Do you think that getting a degree is a prerequisite? And if so, what in?
Well, look at the people who've been in the panels all day today. Look at how different all that research is, right? And how different everyone's background. We've got, English lit studies, we've got, psychology, we've got computer science, we've got graphic design, right? So the thing about research is it's a massive world out there, and games by their nature are multidisciplinary. They touch on everything, right? So the kind of stuff I've been making in my career, we made a negotiation simulation of the Paris Agreement and took it to get it played by the actual diplomats to do the negotiation. So that's climate change impact with games. What? Versus for example, the very technical stuff that William's doing, or the stuff about, you know, glitch, and what is the glitch, and what is the meme of the glitch, and how can it be applied? Like, this is wildly different, right? So what degree should you get in? There's different kinds of games research. So what speaks to you? Are you somebody who loves pure tech and you want to be some kind of wizard of technology? Are you focused on design and the creation of experiences? Or are you somebody who likes broad culture and you can find your way in that way? I think a degree is probably necessary for a university-centered form of research, but any degree, I think, is a good entry route if you're following that path of research. Some will be easier than others. And there's also other kinds of research you can do outside of uni, of course.
And so Romana, coming from industry now, what's your relationship like with sort of standard academic research? What do you think of them? What are the attitudes like between the two?
It is very different, obviously, and there's always been like a big difference between how industry views academia and how academia views, you know, industry. And the thing is, the thing that I guess attracted me to go back to industry is the fact that things move at a much faster pace than they do in academia, and you're not sort of stuck behind, you know, trying to get your ethics forms approved and just kind of being bogged down by those sorts of things. So, I mean, research obviously does have a huge part to play, and you know, industry does look towards, you know, research that obviously guides and can assist in whatever it is they're trying to do. But at the same time, like I said, you know, some things just take so long to actually kind of come to the forefront. And by that point, industry has moved on, you know, at significant pace. So yeah.
There are lots of freedom with that faster sort of timescale.
Definitely.
Is that difficult? Do you miss sort of the slightly glacial nature of research? Not at all.
Not at all, no. I mean, and you know, I was looking for a change for that reason as well. Like, it just kind of felt stagnant for me. And I wanted to do something that was a bit different and pushed me out of my comfort zone as well. And within, you know, like a short few weeks, I was doing things that were vastly different to what I've been used to. So it's like, you know, what David said earlier, like, you do come in and you do that thing where, you know, you're teaching and so on, and it's familiar, it's your area of expertise, but beyond that, you don't really get to dabble as much. And so when you're in, you know, working at a company, you're juggling like lots of different roles as well, wearing multiple hats. And so, yeah, I'm not, certainly not missing academia at all. I'll try and hide my smile.
No. We'll talk more about this later, I'm sure. But I had a question for Robin now. So doing my undergraduate degree in computer science, it felt like largely they were setting me up to do a master's degree, which would then largely be setting me up to do a PhD and so on. Is that true also with when you do game design, for example, or you do a specific games degree? Is there any sense in which they're setting you up to continue high levels in academia in that degree, or is it all industry focused?
Well, I think that varies. It's already been touched on, I guess, in the idea that, as David was saying, that games is not really any one thing. I think one of the biggest things I come up against again and again with applicants for degrees, but also the university system itself, is the understanding that games is not an academic discipline. It's kind of it's a subject, and therefore it's not like a traditional academic study. As computer science is, because computer science is a discipline. It's got its own methods that are bespoke to computer science. So in that sense, I think if you look at Roman and David when they were at GCU, or still at GCU for another day and a half, or somewhere like Abertay, or a lot of the universities like at Sheffield, Hallam, and Staffordshire, whatever, around the UK that are really renowned for games. I think they've all got their different takes on how to deliver a games education, but largely they're all focused on the vocational aspects and industrial aspects, and going out there, and not just necessarily to go out and work in a specific part of the games industry. The games industry is an amorphous thing. There's many different aspects to it, and there's now lots of related industry, TV and film and what have you, are using the same pipelines and processes and technologies, and increasingly transmedia projects as well. So I think if you're looking at games degrees, I'd be less inclined to say they're setting you up under the standard model of undergraduate, potentially masters, then PhD, that kind of traditional research route, if you like. So if I was to reflect on my own experience, when I did a PhD, I started in 2007, there was no such thing as a games PhD. There were games scholars, but there was not really I didn't really have anywhere to sit. No one knew who I was or what I was doing. The PhD itself was really in psychology. Coming from an art background is kind of baffling. So I don't think there is necessarily that traditional model, and even now I don't necessarily think that's the case. Although if I'm speaking to my own students, I do increasingly now tell them about routes into research, whereas 10 years ago I didn't. I was preparing them entirely for design jobs or design roles in different sectors. Now I know that there's a proportion of them, they are there studying games degrees, knowing they want to do a PhD, which is baffling to me. I didn't even know what a degree classification was when I went to university. You know, I only applied to university because my mum saw an advert in the paper and thought, that'll get you out. You're going through that. Whereas now there are folks that are coming to study undergraduate degrees in games, and they know they want to do a PhD in games. So I think it is supported, but it's certainly not the norm, if you like.
And having done games research, having done it for a while, were you well set up to then make these changes, as David and Roman have, into game design or into academia, industry? Sorry, the other one.
Okay, what we're around.
So can we move easily from academia into industry? So Romana, what was that transition like for you, or David, as you move into industry? Are you well set up for it, do you think?
Oh, it's up to me.
I suggested that to two people, and
yeah.
That was a mistake.
So the move from academia to industry, you mean,
yes.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
I don't see why not. I think both Roman and David kind of alluded to the fact that a PhD is not research and vice versa, and that's true. And the one thing I always advise PhD students is that they're fundamentally, they're studying a degree. It's a program about activity that develops skills and knowledge, and those skills and knowledge are not purely about becoming, you know, an academic researcher in a silo doing kind of that traditional snail's pace type activity. Developing the skills in academia should be conducive to good practice in industry as well, whether that's leadership skills, more generally, more cognitive skills like that, but also increasingly most games companies do R&D activity of different scales. They're always conducting research activity, and a PhD lends itself quite well to that, and not just at the the grand scale, like user research, something that's quite complex and quite developed, but also just miniature experiments in design. A PhD lends itself quite well to, I think. So yeah, I think you will see increasingly people moving from academia into industry, just as it kind of worked the other way around as well for the last few years, as folks were transitioning away from industry into learning more how to be an academic.
And so Romana, then, were you well set up for industry?
I was. So this is like my second sort of foray into the industry. But I mean, while I was pursuing my PhD, I was also doing like a lot of freelance work as a user researcher. So I did get to work on projects. Some of them were games based, but others were sort of like, with apps and multimedia in general. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly like my background and what I learned as part of my PhD, but also as well as my undergraduate, like those definitely helped me when I did transition into industry. And I was able to bring a lot of that, especially like, when you're doing like mini experiments and you're trying to test assumptions that you have. More so now, like since the industry's kind of like transferred across to being more sort of data driven as well, it certainly helps having that knowledge and knowing how to certainly apply methods and techniques, and validate your data as well, with the benefit, of course, that you don't really need to sit and wait for ethics approval, which is a bane of my life.
You're making no code sound unethical here.
They're very ethical. I've not done any experiments there yet, but it's that kind of thing that you're not hanging about. Like you've got an idea, you want to do it, you've got the skills in how to design, deploy, get your results, and then you can implement and iterate at a faster pace rather than going, weeks, months before you can go on to the next stage. So it did help. And then transitioning back into academia, which is what I did, was also, like I was able to bring a lot of what I learned from industry. And it was that thing that, things that industry wants to know and needs to know. And David and I had a few conversations around this when we were sort of like going through the undergraduate program and looking at how to sort of, address any gaps that might be there for in the student skill sets. These were the conversations we had about things that I'd learned and what students need to be taught. So it certainly helped also coming back in, but then again my second exit into industry. So all those things definitely help.
Okay. And then David, with your work, you've been doing sort of project-based stuff. Can you pick up the assignment you've done and just move that straight over into industry? Is it valued the same as industry experience?
For me, well, again, it's about what your role is going to be in industry, right? So the kind of person I've accidentally become through no intention is a person who has a direct parallel version. And I only found out what it was called recently, you know, like I didn't know who I was, you know, apparently it's a product manager, apparently, right? What a weird title that is. But that, like, I couldn't get a job as a programmer now, right? I used to be a programmer back in the historic days. I've written physics engines and animation systems and stuff like that. But oh my goodness, am I rusty, right? So those skills have atrophied over time. What am I getting better at? The things I do. And the freedom that you have in academia, outside of your commitments of teaching, to pursue your research interests. And there's always a trade-off between what you can get funding for and what you're interested in. But if you play the game, you can get lucky and you can sometimes align the funding with your interest. So you get good at what you do, right? So what am I good at now? I'm good at teaching communication, all that kind of stuff, understanding people, and, you know, giving lots of contextual advice on projects, right? So I'm good at advising things and correcting problems and problem solving. And then because of all the project work, I'm good at aligning strategy to implementation, whether it's technical or design or any part of it, right? So I'm good at that because it's what I've been doing. It wasn't planned, right? So for me to get a job as a game designer, I think I'm pretty good at game design, but the game industry doesn't hire you because you think you're pretty good at game design. The game industry hires you because you've got titles that they can say, oh, you did that thing, we want to do that exact same thing, so come here. And I think my CV wouldn't get me a badass job in a game company. I'd get a job, right, doing game design, but I don't think I'd get the kind of job I'd want, which is to be in charge. So because the CV doesn't back it up, the skills in the CV are different. But what have I been doing developing skills and developing CV are all the projects, and therefore there's a natural transition into project kind of space. So if, for example, you're somebody who's interested in narrative in games and you're spending your research time as an academic writing, writing experimental narratives and using them as part of your research, you're going to get good at writing experimental narratives. And there's going to be game companies who want that skill. And Robin, I remember, I actually met Robin when he was a PhD student. I don't know if you remember, I think we were both at the same thing in Edinburgh. And if I recall correctly, this is legitimately the first time I've thought of it, you were doing something based on like Ekman's facial expressions and art or something like that. You know, like that could have transitioned into, if you wanted to, into becoming somebody who helps create procedural animation systems for character expression, you know, blah, 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 blah. So unfortunately, it's an it depends question, right? What you spend your time on, what you're interested in, you're going to get good at that kind of thing if you keep putting effort in. And often there's a natural job for that in the game industry.
And does that track with you as well, Romana? If you were to see, if someone were to apply to join No Code and they had a big portfolio of research projects, would you think more favorably on someone with a smaller portfolio of industrial ones, commercial ones?
It's again depending on what it is that you're looking for. Experience is important, but it's not paramount. You know, I think as well as like what experience you have and things, it's your aptitude to learn and your desire and motivation. And you know, why are you applying to where you're applying? Like for me, for instance, like I mean, I was happy in academia, but my thing was that, you know, if I was to move to a games company, it would be one that sort of resonated with, you know, the things that interested me and where I wanted to be or could see myself going. And No Code was, you know, one of those companies. Like I thought, you know, if I do give up academia, it would be to join them because I like their games that they've worked on. It speaks to me. So yeah, I mean, you don't need to necessarily be, you know, you could have like a huge, massive portfolio, but that doesn't necessarily translate, you know, into the other skills which are equally important, like also like personal skills as well. Like, how do you work in a team? How do you work in a small team? You know, are you, you know, some people work better alone than they do in a team as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I would say that portfolio isn't like the main determining factor in that.
Mm-hmm. Did they, when you joined them, did they come and find you and say, we really like the research work you're doing? Or were you applying and said, you know, I'm a researcher, but I've also done some stuff in academia, in industry?
Yeah, so it was a bit more of the latter, because I mean, I know both John and Omar at No Code, known them for a long time actually, and I just saw it on social media that they were looking for a producer, so I reached out to them and told them that I was, well, actually no, I tested the waters first to see what they were looking for.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm not going to make a film of myself if they're looking for something completely different, and then from that I kind of got the vibe that I think I'd be a good fit for this, and we took things from there. So yeah.
Cool. So changing track a bit then, Robin, I wanted to ask you about what trends do you see emerging in games research at the moment, and ideally, what do you think people should be doing? What work do you wish was doing that you don't see enough of, if there is anything that comes to mind?
Automated testing, that's a good thing, is it?
Automated testing is great. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Yeah.
Actually, no, it is in that area. I think that's where a lot of the activity is happening. So, to echo what's been said already in the panel, that there has been a bit of a gulf, I think, between the industry and academia historically, where it's been more of a kind of we teach, we bring on graduates, a new workforce, what have you. I think the gap is narrowing between industry and academia, especially in pockets where good research is taking place. One of the areas where that's obviously grown the most is in the kind of intersection of psychology, ACI, and data, and around things like automated testing. Automated testing is one of the things that I think a lot of companies have come to me over years and asked about. They've been gradually inquired, say, well, this is something we would love to do, we don't know how to go about it. They'll have data scientists, they're hiring people, but they still need the academic research. So certainly in that aspect, of course, that feeds into other things around acquisition of users and that kind of processing of large data sets. However, that has been a trend for a while. I think that's already well established. I think that there's a growing opportunity for the creativity around what games can be. The person who would have been in this panel, if she was not teaching today instead of me, would have been Lynn Love, for instance. And her work, I think, speaks to that. It's the creativity around social play, around bringing people together, is a one good example of that. It's the kind of activity that games companies do. And I think if you look in somewhere like Scotland and somewhere like Biome Collective are a good example, for instance, that they're much more in a kind of creative, fluid space. But you know what? A lot of games companies just can't have that level of experimentation and creativity for financial reasons. They have to hedge their bets with the projects that want to keep them sustainable. So I think there is a grey area in there where, so for instance, at Abertay, we founded the Abertay Game Lab quite a while ago now, and that is just a kind of collective of academics who make games like myself. And I think there's scope there where games researchers can be making experimental games in a kind of safer space, a kind of fundamental research and innovative research around play or mechanics, around storytelling, what have you. And that lends itself into collaboration with games companies where they can take it on. So I think you do find those intersections. I think increasingly as well that will start to come into play more and more as not just collectives like Biome Collective, but other larger companies want to engage with researchers who can do that kind of playful stuff. So to me, that's the main trend. What I would call practice-based research in games, I think, is probably one of the areas that's most ripe for development.
And so, David, then, if you could tell people what to research, or tell people what not to research, maybe there are stagnated areas. What comes to mind?
I'm dying for this opportunity. I mean, I love telling people what to do. Robin said, the way you finished that, Robin, saying practice-based research, right? There's something I want to build off of that. Do you know what I am so incredibly sick of? Questions like, can games do X? The answer is always and only ever can be, it depends if you do it well, right? So I mean, oh my goodness, I go to these conferences and every second paper presentation is, can games teach this? Can games? Yes. How is what I want to know, right? How? So practice-based research doesn't mean just making a thing, right? It means trying to find some way to build some sort of shared understanding of how we make things and what are the emergent properties of ways of designing. Nobody knows how to design games, by the way. Game designers have got no clue how to design games. They can do it, but they don't know how they do it in the same way that the centipede doesn't know how it walks, right? It's in their DNA, it's in their bones, it's implicit knowledge, it's not explicit knowledge. And oh my goodness, do we need to get better at stop wasting so much academic effort and money on these dead ends of like simple questions to very complicated answers. And when somebody's challenged me when I say nobody knows how to design games, the biggest game companies don't know how to design games, as shown by their games, right? As shown by the fact that they're all messy as all heck until 6 months before release, as shown by the fact that they're always delayed, as shown by the fact that amazing games are crap a year before they come out, after 4 years of development, and then some magic happens in that last year, i.e. what we know is that if we keep trying and keep playing and keep trying to make it better, we somehow get there, right? But that's not, that there's a gap there between practice and knowledge, and I think academia is a field that should be trying to do a better job of that. I'd like to shout out a really amazing researcher who I've never met, who probably thinks there's some weird guy who always shouts her out, called Neal. Neal studied in France at Kavanagh, and her PhD was on game design tools. And these tools that exist, they're kind of rubbish, right? It's always quicker to just jump straight into Unity or Unreal and just bang it out in Engine. But we need better tools, right? In the same way that we have quite well understood, although never prescriptive, patterns and ways of doing other, like architects, for example, like they kind of have a set of like well established methods, plus you have the magic of creativity. Without turning it into paint by numbers, we should be improving the methods in games, and it shouldn't just be bloody post-it notes on a wall and let's just figure it out and then do a post-mortem. And even so that's the one. I mean, I'm going to stop.
Like,
but like
wall, David.
Sorry, Romana.
Like what's on your wall behind you?
That's just to make it look like I know what I'm talking about. Those are all a blank.
We had a question, Romana, maybe you would like to answer this. What are the games research areas that need to be investigated better? Where do poor or stagnant approaches to games research exist that require new thinking or approaches?
Yeah, that was from Andrew, who was also my ex-PhD student. So
well, you're a great person to answer then.
I hope so. I think areas that need to be investigated better, I agree with what David said. Like, I think game design as a whole still requires lots of investigation. You know, there's no sort of like standardized approach to doing things. You know, designers as a whole have their own techniques and methods, but you can't take one person's process and say, right, okay, if I follow these steps, you know, this is what I should hopefully get at, you know, the end of it. So I think games design as a whole still needs lots of investigation. My own sort of background and area of interest was also kind of in user research and just understanding how users interact with products and emotional engagement as well. So I think the area of, you know, user research and user-centered design as well needs further investigation, because now the industry as a whole is obviously taking note of things like, you know, games accessibility and the importance of diverse players, and, you know, how do you incorporate their needs as well, which is extremely valid, you know, and important to do so. So I think pick games as a whole in any area that you sort of dive down into, all of that needs greater research, you know. Where do poor approaches exist? Andrew, at this moment in time, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head because I have been out of the research game for a while. Maybe David or Robin might be able to do that one, but I mean, I think it's not maybe necessarily poor approaches, but I think it's refining processes that are already out there, because everybody's sort of providing the building blocks, but it's then refining those processes to come up with something that's a lot better, but it will take time to get there.
David said that we don't know how to develop games. Do we know
Design
how to
games.
do we know how to design them? Do we know how to research them? Like, are we good at it? Do the insights we get from them, are they helpful?
I'm going to jump on and say a lot of the time I think there's almost no value to a lot of the games research in my particular bit, which is
Cool.
this kind of like
That's good.
applied serious
Cool.
games bit, right? So here's an example, right, without naming any names, but like systematic review of serious games and their impacts. Hey, great, excellent. See, if you look at that, do you know what they count as a game? They count an online quiz that's got a timer and a score, and they count World of Warcraft. These things have got very little in common, right? What's the point of that, okay? You can apply scientific rigor to your way of gathering the papers and excluding all the ones without a good, you know, randomly controlled blind, double-blind study, whatever. But what's the point? If you're saying that World of Warcraft and an online quiz are the same thing, they're not the same thing, right? So there's some good research out there, but you have to hunt for it, right? You have to be 50% avid reader, 50% some sort of like I don't even know, right? Da Vinci. We need more Da Vinci's. They're rare, I hear.
You don't ask for much. Da
No,
Vinci's.
no,
Okay.
just a few would do.
We had one question to. I'll just stop this for now because I think we'll move on to back to the pathways question because that's sort of what this talk is all about. Well, I think this is interesting. So we had a question that Robin, maybe you can answer. So, what are some examples of routes into research that aren't coming from academia or from industry? Are there any? And that was from Andrew Gordon.
Routes into research, is it?
Routes into research or academia that are coming neither from academia or from industry. Is there anything else?
Yeah, well, to me, these are overlapping areas of a Venn diagram that covers a lot of things. What is academia and what is industry? I can't say off the top of my head I can see ways into research that's neither applied in practical and industrial context or academic in that you're studying it. So I'm not really sure on that one what else you could add to that.
Well, I think, Robin, you gave a good example earlier on. You mentioned the Biome Collective, right? And
yeah.
they're doing some stuff that is, I think, research adjacent. Like it's pushing the boundaries further. Some of the people in that collective better than many of academics who are trying to do similar things, I think.
It is, although I would still class, I think if any terminology, as soon as you apply it, I would struggle not to classify Biome Collective as part of the wider games industry because it's kind of exclusionary. So I think in that context, no. But if you see in the UK research funding landscape, what you'll see is that increasingly, there's various political reasons for this, which I won't go into because it's no longer the political priority. There's another political priority which has pushed it down to number 2. But the number 2 political priority on our list in the UK has changed the funding landscape, and now actually games companies are able to apply for funding as the principal investigator. That wasn't the case 5-6 years ago. So the HRC, for instance, Arts Research Council, have been awarding grants where the primary investigator, if you like, if you want to use the terminology, the jargon of academia, is the games company. Whereas previously the games companies were partners who were kind of dragged along in the wake of the kind of bureaucracy of the university, sometimes kind of regretfully, because they didn't want to be soaked up into that. And I think that is changing the way things are working because and maybe Biome is a good example because I know that Mal and Tom and others have sought funding through those channels. But it does mean that the research questions, which is fundamentally the main thing if you talk about games research and we can talk about methods and what have you. I find methods all very kind of tedious because there's always a method. There's always a thing that you could apply. And games research methods, because games is not a discipline, then really it is any method from any discipline you could apply. The important thing is the question, what's the research question you're asking? And the fact that games companies, well, maybe collectives and arts collectives and what have you, artists always ask research questions, maybe don't term it that way, but the fact that the questions that are emerging from these places, as well as they're emerging from companies that are interested in user data and retention, they're asking research questions. The fact that the UK funding landscape is kind of tilting, so those research questions are being prioritized as coming from industry, I think is what's changing things a bit more for the better. Like you were saying, David, that there's plenty of studies out there you can identify that maybe are a bit problematic because fundamentally the question that's been asked has not been thought through to a proper conclusion. And lo and behold, all the work's been done and the end goal has been to publish a paper, and because that is the kind of metric of success in academia, or traditionally has been. But if you can value more that the questions come from a no-code or a Biome or an Outplay or a Ubisoft, it could be any scale. If the research questions are coming from there and academia's role is to assist in figuring out how to address those questions, and not yes or no type questions like you said, it's not like can they do this, of course they can, but more how do we go about tackling this question, what are the various tools, and some of those tools are going to be in the toolbox of the games companies and the arts collectives because they're much more fluid organizations, they're much quicker to respond to things, as we've already said. But other tools are going to be in the toolbox of the universities. So, yeah. Bye, David. I've offended David. He's away now.
No,
Just jump out the window. Yeah, you tell him off.
But I'm conscious of time, and we have got loads of questions actually that have come in, and I'll try and get through some of them. But my biggest question, the one I'm most excited to ask, and it's a bit cruel because I'm now going to say, can we answer them quickly? And I'll try and get around to everyone. Should we get David back? And starting with Robin, because you're supposed to be the forces of good here. Is games research good? Is it fun? Is it fulfilling? And would you advise people to do it if they were on the precipice?
Oh, why did you pick me first? yes, with an asterisk, where the asterisk is be careful. And I think we've already heard some of the warnings. Very generally speaking, games is a trend, generally speaking, and I know that the others on the panel have been involved in funded research, including European funded research, and games get dragged into a lot of things in terms of like, let's make a game to solve X, Y, or Z. And I think that can be problematic. Often games have been selected as the kind of research vehicle rather than logically picked for any other meaningful reason. So that's the challenging aspect, is being mindful of that. You know, they are kind of on brand, if you like, for research, generally speaking. However, on the other hand, imagine, you know, you're getting paid to study games, which is something I can pretty much say in my own applicant days. Or whenever I catch a student that seems to have not been attending class, I think, why are you not attending class? You know, you're coming here to study games. What else could be, you know, apart from being a mechanic, which I almost accidentally was, what else could you possibly be doing that's more fun than that? But it is about being confident, I guess. And it took me 2 or 3 years until after my PhD was done before I was confident enough to say, this is not the research I want to do. That's the research I want to do over there. And to kind of define it for yourself, have the confidence to own it yourself. So yeah, there is those opportunities, but there's also the warning of don't get dragged into things that are not in your interests.
So Romana, the same question to you then. Is it rewarding to be a games researcher?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, although I know I've said that, you know, like, I'm glad that I've kind of come into industry. I think all the things that I've done and the experiences I've had have shaped the person that I am today, and kind of have brought me to where I am as well. And I absolutely enjoyed, you know, research and working in the lab and kind of pursuing things that were of interest. But I think with anything, you know, there are ups and downs as well. So ask yourself, you know, like, and understand what it is that you're getting yourself into and what you are committing to as well. And you know, if that is your thing, then absolutely, like, it can be a lot of fun as well, and the connections that you make and the people that you can work with, and you know, you can actually make a real impact and difference as well with the research that you do. So absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks.
At least
David?
my answer is, I think it's amazing, right? I think, I'm going to use a swear, I think it's fucking brilliant to dedicate yourself towards games research, right? It has been amazing for me. I've got to see the world. I've got to just focus on the most amazing ideas and try to actually push knowledge forward. What? That's amazing for some wee guy from Glasgow, right? I think working in games research has been so fulfilling. The freedom you get to say, hey, this is a question I think people are doing wrong. I think we should be doing it this way. And then try to go into that is like, wow, who gets to do that? Who gets to live a life oriented around pursuing their greatest curiosities, right? You have to either be some kind of billionaire, and all the billionaires just waste their money trying to go to Mars, right? So you get to, either you're a billionaire, you get freedom, or you're an academic, you get freedom, and a bunch of really crap marking and like stuff like that, right? But you get the gift of control to some extent. And the stuff I've got to do is amazing. The questions I've got to ask, the things I've got to make, the people I've got to meet and work with. I've met some amazing people in this academic career. And I think I might end up going back to academia at some point. It's incredibly cool. It's also a pain in the arse, right? Like everything else. But it's incredibly, incredibly cool. And I think if you have the chance to get in, you grab that, and you just don't waste it. You just don't waste it by doing stupid projects that have no point to them. You don't waste it by just waiting to retirement because nobody's going to check up on you. It's not the kind of job that anybody checks up on you, right? As long as you turn up to classes, get your marking done, nobody cares what you do outside of that. Yeah, you won't be promoted if you don't bring in research money, but also nobody will stop you doing anything anyway. Like, you just do what you like. People do the weirdest things in academia. I managed to meet people, build connections, get dead lucky with funded projects, and I've now got like a little game studio in a university. What? That's cool, right? And that's my particular interest. Whatever your interest is, you can make it happen in a university context if you're somebody who's pursued by those kind of curiosities. You'll never get rich, and you'll always have to do homework, right? Essays and marking. But apart from that, it's amazing.
I think that's quite a nice note to end on, I guess, then.